Gravitas and Palki Sharma Upadhyay, let's get started. Yesterday, right after this show, I got a message. It had an old journalist talking about how the news media only shows the bad news. There's a lot that's wrong with the world, and it's important to report all of that. But there are also things going right. And it's equally important to strike that balance in our reportage to give you the full picture. So starting tonight, we'll consciously try to give you the good news as well. In the sea of positive cases, we do not want to lose our positivity. So when we report Wuhan virus infections, we'll also look at the recoveries. When we talk about the climate crisis, we'll also look at the countries that are doing things right. And that doesn't mean we do not call out the countries that aren't doing things right, countries like the US and China, the world's top emitters. America held a global climate summit today. It urged other countries to be more ambitious in cutting emissions, set themselves a big target to lead by example. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you why this approach is flawed. Also, for a world that could not come together to fight the current and present danger of the pandemic. Can you expect united action on a threat that will fully manifest itself in the future? The threat of climate change. We'll talk about it. Also on the show tonight, a blast ripped through a hotel in Quetta in Balochistan was a target the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. He was staying in the same hotel. Australia has overruled the state of Victoria and cancelled a Belt and Road deal with China. Beijing is thundering threats. The Chinese government is also threatening American car maker Tesla. After a stunt at an auto show, Tesla says sorry, China hasn't forgiven it. We have the video. And when a couple separates, what happens to their dog? In Spain, they can go to court. A new law gives the provision of joint custody of pets. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Russia stages show of force near Ukraine with launch of Crimean exercises. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in Crimea to oversee large-scale snap drills of Russia's southern military district and paratroopers. A missile launched from Syria was fired into southern Israel early Thursday, setting off air raid sirens near the country's top-secret nuclear reactor. In response, it said the Israeli ministry attacked the missile launcher and air defense systems in neighboring Syria. NASA announces that its Perseverance rover has extracted the first sample of oxygen from Mars. This first conversion of carbon dioxide to oxygen could open up possibilities for further experimentation towards the goal of seeing humans on Mars in the future. Gunmen have attacked a private university in Nigeria's northern Kaduna state, killing one staff member, and an unknown number of students have been kidnapped. As per the head of its Roscosmos space agency on Wednesday, Russia is ready to start building its own space station with the aim of launching it into orbit by 2030, if President Vladimir Putin gives the go-ahead. The project would mark a new chapter for Russian space exploration and an end to more than 2 decades of close cooperation with the United States aboard the International Space Station. According to research, traces of radioactive fallout from nuclear weapons tests carried out decades ago are showing up in American honey. The amount of radiation in each sample isn't enough to harm anyone who eats it, but it could explain bee population declines across the states. Britain's domestic intelligence service MI5 is set to open an official Instagram account on Thursday in the latest step by the country's spy agencies to come out of the shadows. As per the UK's Press Association reports, the security service, as it is formally known, will take the handle MI5 Official and use the account to bust popular myths and reveal never-before-seen archived material. According to the European Union's climate monitoring service, the Arctic sizzled in 2020 and was nearly half a degree Celsius hotter than previous warmest year. Europe too, according to this report, endured record heat and rainfall last year and recorded its warmest year by far. The 12 clubs involved in the now abandoned Super League breakaway project are facing sanctions for their rebellion. UEFA President Alexander Seferin has said that the clubs will suffer the consequences of their mistake and that the punishments will be discussed next week. Meanwhile, in England, the Premier League has reportedly directed the Big Six to resign from all subcommittees, which handle key aspects of strategy and finance, or be forcibly removed. The International Olympic Committee has announced that athletes protesting inside stadiums and on podiums at the Tokyo Games will be punished. IOC's Rule 50 on athlete expression forbids demonstrations of political, religious or racial propaganda. Although those were revisited as many athletes around the world started taking a knee or raising fists in support of racial equality. However, the IOC's Athletes Commission says that their own survey of Olympic athletes revealed that a majority were against protests spilling over onto the field of play.
Let's start with the second wave. It shows no signs of abating. Look at India's numbers. Daily infections set a world record today. More than 314,000 new cases in a day. 314,000 plus. This takes India's tally to almost 16 million cases. That's the total number of cases India has had since last year. 16 million, the second highest in the world. The highest is in the United States. What's worse, India is struggling with shortages, from medicines to oxygen. But it's not all bad news. The recoveries give hope. Let me show you some figures. India's total cases since last year, as I said, close to 16 million. Active cases right now, 2.2 million. So there are more than 22 lakh people who are still positive in India. What about the recoveries? More than 84% patients in India have recovered. That's over 13 million people. 1.16% have died. A pretty big number. More than 180,000 deaths since last year. India's best bet to curb this surge is to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So far, more than 130 million doses have been given. Do you know how many people got infected after taking the shot? Not even 0.1%. For both the vaccines, Covishield and Covaxin, the numbers are very good. The percentage of people who have been infected is not more than 0.04%, which means only 2 to 4 people out of every 10,000 who took the vaccine got infected after taking the shot. On the 1st of May, India will open its vaccination program to all adults above the age of 18, so make sure you take the jab. Now let's talk about the rest of the world. The numbers are not as bad as in India, but not good either. The surge in Europe and South America began in March, and it's not slowing down. In all, more than 143 million people have been infected since last year. More than 3 million people have died worldwide. In the last 14 days, the cases have grown by 23%. The deaths have risen by 14%. Countries are stepping up vaccination. The biggest ever global vaccination campaign is underway. More than 944 million doses have been administered in 170 countries. The daily average is 16 million doses. It may sound impressive, but it's not, because at this rate, we'll take years to achieve herd immunity globally. Vaccine production must be ramped up substantially. Look at Europe. The EU booked more than 1 billion shots in advance. But the vaccination campaign has struggled to take off. And now the bloc is preparing to sue AstraZeneca. Reports say the European Commission will launch legal proceedings. AstraZeneca was to supply at least 300 million doses to the EU, but it has slashed its deliveries by 2/3. That's because of manufacturing issues and other commitments. The EU will have none of it, so they'll take the company to court. Vaccine shortage is clearly a serious issue. Then comes vaccine counterfeiting. This is happening in Poland and Mexico. Fake Pfizer vaccines are on sale here, and these fake doses were being sold for as much as $1,000 a shot. Here is Mexico's Deputy Health Secretary explaining what they found.
It was an underground operation, a kind of clinic which had been made known through various online media. This clinic was found selling what were supposed to be Pfizer vaccines at exorbitant prices of up to 40,000 to 50,000 pesos for the vaccine.
Reports say the vials were found in beer coolers. Some 80 people got the fake Pfizer shot in Mexico. Thankfully, these were harmless injections, so no side effects. But the prospect is scary, having fake vaccines. So rising cases, squabbling countries, a shortage of vaccines, and now fake jabs. The world needs united global leadership to defeat this pandemic. But where are the world leaders? 40 of them were on a video call today, not to discuss the pandemic crisis, but to hold deliberations on climate change. The United States is hosting this climate summit. This is a two-day event, and every world leader of significance is attending, from Joe Biden himself to India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chinese President Xi Jinping, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and even Russian President Vladimir Putin. They were all there. Remember, 4 years ago, the United States had left the Paris Accord. Now it's back. And Joe Biden wants America to reclaim its global leadership on climate action, notwithstanding the fact that America has been the world's biggest polluter. The culprit wants to play the top cop, and the world is playing ball. So this is what we have. America is telling other countries to speed up their efforts. America is telling others to take more aggressive steps to reduce greenhouse gases. But what does America, the biggest carbon polluter in history, plan to do about its own carbon emissions? President Joe Biden has set an ambitious target. He wants to reduce emissions by at least 50% in the coming years.
The United States isn't waiting. We are resolving to take action. Not only our federal government, but our cities and our states all across our country. Small businesses, large corporations, American workers in every field. By maintaining those investments and putting these people to work, the United States sets out on the road to cut greenhouse gases in half by the end of this decade. That's where we're headed as a nation.
That's where we're headed as a nation, he says. And where the US goes, others must follow. At least that's the expectation. The UN Secretary General chimed in. He welcomed Biden's announcement and said others should follow suit.
Mother Nature is not waiting. The past decade was the hottest on record. Dangerous greenhouse gases are at levels not seen in 3 million years. Global temperature has already risen 1.2 degrees Celsius, racing towards the threshold of catastrophe. Leaders everywhere must take action. First, by building a global coalition for net zero emissions by mid-century, every country, every region, every city, every company, and every industry. Second, by making this a decade of transformation.
A decade of transformation. What does that mean? The UN Secretary General wants countries to submit, and I'm quoting, new and more ambitious measures. The mission should be to cut all emissions to zero by 2050. That's what we call net zero, zero emissions. And this is what the world should aim at, net zero emissions, and specify what action they'll take to get there. The next speakers were from India and China, the world's growth engines and hence major emitters themselves. China's President Xi Jinping spoke first. He had nothing new to announce. He reiterated Beijing's plans to attain net zero status by 2060. And he said that China will reduce coal consumption between 2026 to 2030. That's a good target, we say, but here's a fact. In 2020, China commissioned 76% of the world's new coal-fired power plants.
We will strictly control coal-fired power generation projects. We will strictly limit the increase in coal consumption over the 14th five-year plan period and phase it down in the 15th five-year plan period.
More facts. China's coal consumption this year was 4 billion tons. India's was 1 billion tons. Prime Minister Modi of India called for concrete action from the global community. He also underlined the progress made by India in combating climate change.
We in India are doing our part. Our ambitious renewable energy target of 450 gigawatts by 2030 shows our commitment. Despite our development challenges, we have taken many bold steps on clean energy, energy efficiency, afforestation, and biodiversity.
India made no new pledges today, and that's something that Delhi had said even after the visit of US climate envoy John Kerry a couple of weeks back. India will not increase its climate ambitions at the behest of developed countries. Then came Japan and Canada. They joined the United States to announce 50% emission cuts in the next decade. Remember, the summit was being held virtually. Halfway through it, the climate summit ran into rough weather. There were some technical issues. French President Emmanuel Macron was cut off. He was in the middle of his speech. The live feed abruptly moved to Russian President Vladimir Putin. He was taken unawares. As he gathered himself, the camera and the world's attention was on him.
A pleasure to call upon the President of the French Republic, His Excellency Emmanuel Macron. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mesdames et messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, Monsieur le Président des États-Unis, dans les prochaines semaines et les prochains mois,
I now turn the floor to the President of the Russian Federation, His Excellency Vladimir Putin.
Dans une loi climat européenne, avec le Green Deal pour lui donner corps. À nous donc maintenant de...
The floor is now to the President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Vladimir Putin. Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We had some technical difficulties, so we want to return the floor to the President of France, Emmanuel Macron.
It was an awkward technical glitch for the host. The United States, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as you heard, apologized for the error, and they went back to President Macron, who then completed his speech. The European Union has signed up, to turn net zero by 2050, with member states agreeing on binding targets. But not everyone is following the trend. Joe Biden said that the key goal of the summit was to get countries to raise their ambitions. Now, we've said this before and we'll say it again. This approach is flawed. A, because the level of culpability is not the same. China and the United States are the world's biggest carbon emitters right now. And B, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. Climate change is the punching bag of world politics. It is a footnote of every joint diplomatic statement. Think about it. When rivals cannot find common ground, what do? They talk about climate instead. That's what the United States and China are doing. They can't agree on anything, so they're discussing climate change. Same for Russia. Vladimir Putin attended Joe Biden's climate summit, but he's silent on a proposed one-on-one meeting. What we are saying is very simple. Politicians love to call themselves allies of nature, but can they unite to deal with climate change? And we ask this because their track record is not impressive. Look at the Wuhan virus pandemic. Thousands of people are dying every day. It's been more than a year, and we are still waiting for a coordinated global response. All this talk about a globalized world. But when tragedy struck, it was every country for itself. From travel bans to now vaccines, every decision has been unilateral. The world has more than enough resources to crush this pandemic, but it has no plan, no joint approach. Europe has extra vaccines. Sub-Saharan Africa has none. When most of the world was staying at home, people in Yemen and Syria were fleeing from bombs. Ideally, this should have not happened. The call for social distancing was for individuals, not for countries. So we are back to the question, if the world could not unite against a deadly pandemic, can it join hands to fight climate change? You see, the Wuhan virus is a pressing issue. People are dying today, now. Climate change, on the other hand, is a long-term problem. And we know how much politicians love the back burner. If it's not on their calendar, it is not a pressing matter. That's one reason why climate change is relegated to talking shops. But why is climate action such a difficult issue? For starters, not everyone believes in it. A United Nations survey found that 64% people believe climate change is a global emergency. And you might think that number is impressive. But let me put it this way. What if I told you that 60% people in the world believe the earth is round? That still leaves 40% flat earthers. You see, science is not a matter of opinion. It is based on facts. But politicians have used climate change to rally their support base. Donald Trump did that during his presidency. Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil continues to do it in his country. Denying climate change has become a political strategy, and scientists have not been able to bust these theories. They say bigger tsunamis and hurricanes are caused by climate change. But proving this link is hard work. It's difficult. For example, the oceans are rising, and that's a fact. But it's not something you see every time you go to a beach, even if you go there every day. So the first challenge is to accept the problem. The second challenge is to accept responsibility. Who takes the blame? Temperatures are not rising themselves. So who triggered climate change in the first place? Most of the pollution we see today is courtesy the West. Even now, they make up more than half of the global emissions. So it is a crisis that the West created. But now they want the whole world to solve it. And this has created friction between the global North and South. A lot of these people do not know where their next meal is coming from. Climate change is not their priority, and that should hardly be surprising. If the choice is between fighting poverty and climate change, it's a no-brainer for the developing world. So what's the solution? The developed world must foot the bill. They must transfer technology to developing nations. This was the spirit of the 1992 Rio Declaration. It called for common but differentiated responsibilities. Is the West doing that? It isn't. Instead of transferring technology and money, it is outsourcing its pollution to the global South and then telling these countries to set up better targets. This is never going to work. There is no denying that our modern lifestyles are also a part of the problem. We prefer cars over walking or biking. We pack most of our groceries in polythene instead of paper. And these may appear small, but imagine 7 billion people doing the same day after day. It adds up to a big problem. So here's something we must know. Climate change is unlike any challenge that humanity has faced. Because unlike pandemics and wars, here we have a warning. We have time to prepare for this impending disaster. But we are not exactly making good use of it. We are arguing and grandstanding instead of acting. Let me end with this observation. With masks and vaccines, we can beat the Wuhan virus. But when the oceans rise, there is no fix. When the air becomes unbreathable, masks will not work. So it's time for world leaders to pull up their socks. We've had more than enough summits on climate change. What we need now is concrete legal action. Speaking of which, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has vowed to wipe out terror in his country. This is a tall promise. Unattainable, some would say. It came shortly after a suicide attack in Balochistan. On Wednesday night, 50 kilos of RDX exploded at a luxury hotel in Quetta. 4 people were killed, 11 were injured. The Tehreek-e-Taliban has claimed responsibility. Islamabad says their target was the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan.
This is the Serena Hotel in Quetta, the capital of Balochistan province. It is located right next to the Iranian consulate and the provincial assembly of Balochistan. On Wednesday night, a deadly blast ripped through this luxury hotel. A vehicle laden with 50 kilograms of RDX exploded in the hotel's parking lot. 4 people were killed, 11 others have been wounded. The blast happened shortly after iftar.
This incident occurred after iftar. The car was parked in the parking lot of the Serena Hotel. The blast killed 4 people and injured 11. One of our police constables is among the injured.
It was a suicide attack, orchestrated by the Tehreek-e-Taliban, an offshoot of the Afghan Taliban. On target was this diplomat, Nong Rong, the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. He was staying at the hotel with 4 other Chinese delegates. But he was out for a meeting at the time of the explosion.
The Chinese ambassador to Pakistan, Ambassador Nong Rong, was also staying in the same hotel, but unfortunately he was not present at the time of the blast. He was not present inside the hotel, and he was just minutes out. He is safe, and all of the other Chinese delegates are safe as well. That has been confirmed by the authorities.
In Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry is alarmed. It has condemned the attack, promising to firmly support Pakistan's anti-terrorism efforts.
China strongly condemns the terror attack, expresses its condolences to the tragic victims, and extends its sympathy to the injured. We will continue to firmly support Pakistan's counter-terrorism efforts, jointly maintain and promote regional security and stability, and ensure the safety of Chinese personnel and institutions in Pakistan.
Back in Islamabad, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says he's saddened by the loss of innocent lives, promising not to let the scourge of terrorism re-emerge. But ask the people of Balochistan and they'll tell you this promise means nothing. The province has seen 6 decades of insurgency by separatists who want independence from Pakistan. Their objective is to end Islamabad's monopoly and the exploitation of the province's mineral resources. This conflict intensified with the onset of the CPEC in 2017, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It is increasingly turning Balochistan into a Chinese colony. Billions of dollars are flowing into the region. Thousands of outsiders are getting jobs. But the Baloch people continue to toil in poverty, pushed to the margins. In recent years, they have carried out multiple attacks on Chinese investments. In 2018, 3 Chinese nationals were injured in a suicide attack near Quetta. In 2019, gunmen stormed a hotel in the Chinese-run Gwadar seaport, killing 5 people. And in 2020, Baloch insurgents stormed the Karachi Stock Exchange, killing 9 people. Now, with the suicide attack targeted at the Chinese ambassador, it has become absolutely clear that Balochistan is slowly becoming China's Achilles heel for its mega Belt and Road initiative and the jewel in its crown, the CPEC. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
There was a time when China called Australia chewing gum stuck at the sole of its shoes. Now Australia has given China a dose of its own medicine, not in words. But this is something that Beijing is finding too hard to swallow. The Australian government has torn up a deal between the state of Victoria and Xi Jinping's superhighway to world power, the Belt and Road Initiative. In other words, Australia has scrapped a BRI project. It's a belting that has let loose Chinese propagandists once again. We'll discuss that in a bit, but first let's tell you what has happened. Australia, as you know, consists of self-administered states. There are 6 of them, and they have their own constitutions, their own legislatures. They also have the powers to sign deals with foreign governments. So the state of Victoria, which also happens to be a major financial hub in Australia, signed a memorandum of understanding with China. This was for investments via the Belt and Road Initiative. For Victoria, this deal meant considerable economic benefits. For Beijing, it meant an economic foothold on Australian soil. The Scott Morrison government found this arrangement in conflict with national interest. Beijing and Canberra, as you're already aware, have been clashing on multiple fronts. There's an ongoing face-off over the Wuhan virus's origin, a diplomatic spat over crackdown on Australians in China, and disputes over Chinese sanctions on Australian products. Simply put, the bilateral ties are at their lowest point ever. So the Australian government has scrapped Victoria's decision to join the BRI. The deal has now been overruled, and this was done through a new veto legislation. It was introduced in the Australian Parliament last year. Listen to this.
The Foreign Relations Act that our government put in place was designed to protect our national interests by ensuring that there were no other agreements entered into by any other level of government that would conflict with Australia's national interest. And so what we've done is we've followed through. And there have been 4 agreements that the Foreign Minister has terminated in line with that Foreign Relations Act, that power that we were able to attract from the Parliament.
So how has China responded? Just like it always does, with threats and bluster. The Chinese embassy in Australia has branded the move as unreasonable and provocative. It says this decision is bound to bring further damage and that Australia will only end up hurting itself. Meanwhile, the Chinese embassy in Australia has labelled the move as reckless interference. It has expressed its quote-unquote strong dissatisfaction. Watch this.
The Australian federal government has no reason to cancel the Belt and Road Cooperation Agreement between the Victoria State Government and the Chinese government. This brings reckless interference and damage to our regular exchanges and cooperation. This severely harms China-Australian interests and mutual trust. China expresses strong dissatisfaction and firm opposition to this. China has already lodged solemn representations with Australia. China reserves the right to take further action.
We reserve the right to take further action, says China. So far, the action seems to be restricted to social media fury, much of it fueled by Beijing's propaganda machine. Anti-Australia hashtags have been flying like missiles. Weibo users have been let loose, and they're calling Australia mad, undignified, a lackey of America. Meanwhile, the Global Times is doing its bit. It is attributing its headlines to anonymous observers and warning Australia of serious consequences. But Australia says it will not budge in the face of these threats. It will continue to act in national interest and do whatever it takes to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. I'll wrap with this.
We will always act in Australia's national interest to protect Australia, but to also ensure that we can advance our national interests of a free and open Indo-Pacific and a world that seeks a balance in favour of freedom.
Meanwhile, Indonesia is facing a major crisis on the high seas, and for a change, it is not linked to China, so far at least. Indonesia has lost a submarine. The vessel was conducting a torpedo drill with more than 50 people on board. It was given permission to dive into deeper waters, and since then it has been missing. The Indonesian Defence Forces have begun a rescue mission, but they are in a race against time. The crew on board this submarine has less than 3 days of oxygen left. Our next report tells you more.
3 a.m. Wednesday night. This Indonesian submarine sought permission for a deeper dive into the Bali Sea. It got the go-ahead. Hours later, the submarine failed to report back. It lost contact with 53 crew members on board. The submarine is now missing. The Navy has sent a distress call, but it hasn't been able to track the exact location of the submarine yet. The vessel's last known location was 95 kilometers north of Bali. A helicopter last spotted the only possible sign of the missing vessel, an oil slick. This was in the area where the submarine began its dive. A rescue mission is on, and time is of the essence. The 53-member crew has less than 3 days of oxygen left.
Apabila kondisi blackout seperti sekarang ini, kalau diperkirakan blackout itu mampu.
If we assume the submarine has been in a blackout condition, the submarine's oxygen reserve capacity in a blackout is 72 hours or about 3 days. So starting from when it lost contact on Wednesday around 3 a.m., it could last until Saturday at 3 a.m. Let's hope we can find them before then.
The rescue effort will be a tricky one. Reports say the submarine sank to a depth of 700 meters, well below the safe levels, to withstand the water pressure. 6 warships, a helicopter, and 400 people are now involved in the rescue effort. Help is also pouring in from overseas. Singapore and Malaysia have dispatched their ships. The United States, Australia, France, and Germany have offered assistance.
Saya juga telah memerintahkan Panglima TNI. I have ordered the military chief, Navy Chief of Staff and the Search and Rescue Agency to use all possible efforts and capabilities to carry out optimal search and rescue operation. The main priority is the safety of the 53 crew members.
The missing vessel is one of the 5 submarines that Indonesia operates. Called the Nanggala 402, the submarine was made in the late 1970s. It underwent a 2-year refit in South Korea and was redeployed in 2012. Reports say the submarine is built to hold 34 crew members, but it had 53 on board. It's not clear why they overshot the capacity. Also unclear is why the submarine went missing. Reports say the oil slick could be proof of distress, a possible crack in the hull of the vessel. The chief of the Indonesian Navy is considering 2 possibilities. The submarine tank could have leaked after a dive too deep, or the vessel might have released fluid in an attempt to rise to the surface. Indonesia has undertaken an intense search effort. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
How many of you remember Ace Ventura? It was a movie series starring Jim Carrey, a huge hit when it came out. Carrey played the role of a pet detective. The audience found it so implausible that it was funny. Now, we do not know about pet detectives, but Spain could soon have pet attorneys. The government has introduced a new law to determine custody of animals when couples separate. One of the options is joint custody. Here's a report.
Couples love adopting pets. They take them on walks, click pictures for Instagram, and spoil them with attention. But what happens when the couple breaks up? Who gets to keep the pet? France, Germany, and Switzerland have recognized pets as living beings with rights. And now Spain has joined the campaign. They have unveiled a new legal reform. Until now, animals were seen as mere objects. This reform declares them as sensitive living beings. In a court of law, this makes for an interesting interpretation. Judges can now declare joint custody of pets, same as they do for kids in a divorce settlement. So, how exactly will this work? A lot rides on the judge. The proposal sets out criteria for deciding custody. A judge has 2 broad options: send the pet home with either of the former sweethearts or declare joint custody. But wait, there's more. Mistreatment of pets will be criminalized, so hurting a pet will be considered the same as hurting a human. You could even get compensated if your pet is hurt. The proposal calls it damages for a moral injury. There is sweeping support for this new law in Spain, except the far-right Vox party. Everyone is on board. But you can't deny the whiff of hypocrisy coming from this law. Because, remember, Spain loves a good bullfight. Most of the world has banned them, but in Spain they still draw massive crowds. Joint pet custody doesn't sound as impressive, when jostling and killing bulls is still legal. In 2019, a survey found that 56% of Spaniards were opposed to bullfighting. But in the name of culture and tradition, they continue. At the heart of Spain's new proposal is the legal status of animals. Most countries regard them as objects, so they have no duties and no rights. In such cases, the owner is held responsible for the pet's actions. So if your dog destroys your neighbor's garden, you pay the bill. Trouble begins when there are multiple owners. As in the case of couples, things can get ugly and really expensive. This man from Rhode Island waged a legal battle for 2 years. He spent $15,000 in legal fees, all to wrest custody of his dog from his ex-wife. This could be the new reality in Spain and elsewhere. Pet nups. Lawyers specializing in dog custody and animals on the stand. Does the world have bigger problems? Yes. Could this be settled over a handshake and lunch? Yes, but as they say, modern problems, modern solutions. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
We've seen many pandemic success stories unravel this year, not just among countries, but even in the corporate world. The latest victim seems to be Netflix. Last year was an absolute bonus for them. People were stuck at home, they couldn't go out for movies or concerts, so entertainment had to come home. Enter Netflix. They were on a roll last year, adding 15.8 million new customers in the first quarter of 2020. This momentum continued through the year, but 2021 is a whole new challenge. We are emerging from the pandemic. Most of the world is. Cinema halls are reopening and entertainment has gone virtual. So the world does not need a Netflix subscription to keep busy. The numbers reflect this. Netflix added 3.98 million customers in the first quarter of 2021. 3.98 million. And this might sound impressive, but guess what their target was? 6 million. So Netflix fell short by more than 30%. And we all know what happens when a company underperforms. Their shares tank. Netflix plunged 13% in Tuesday's trade. Their investors lost a lot of money. And the future does not look any better. The company is expecting just 1 million new users in the next quarter. But analysts are expecting more than 4 million. So we could be looking at another quarter of underperformance. But what exactly happened to Netflix? Where did things go wrong? You see, Netflix discovered that the pandemic is a double-edged sword. During lockdowns, they made money. Now that the lockdowns are over, they're losing money. Businesses that bank on disruptions rarely survive those events, and Netflix is a prime example. The market has also changed a lot since last year. Video streaming is not a monopoly anymore. There are new players, and they're coming up with bold new ideas. You probably know what I'm talking about, the likes of, say, HBO Max or Disney Plus. Their shows are quite different from Netflix, and the audience is split. Disney Plus has raked up 100 million subscribers. Netflix stands at 207 million. So is it time to write them off? Well, not yet. Every time Netflix faces a crisis, they have one go-to strategy: produce more content. Because ultimately, that's what the business is about: content, good content. Netflix plans to spend $17 billion on new shows this year, $17 billion. Last year, they spent just $12.5 billion. Most of these new shows target the global audience. Because you see, America is a saturated market. But in Europe and Asia, there is still scope. So regional content is the mantra for Netflix this year. But this is not a guarantee of success, because messing up regional content can be a one-way ticket out of the market. So this is essentially a gamble for Netflix, and a big one at that. But here's the larger story. Will companies that profited from the pandemic extend their dream run? And I can think of a few ones. Zoom video calling, food delivery apps, even liquor companies. There was massive demand for these in 2020. But remember, 2020 was an aberration, not the norm. So as and when we emerge from this pandemic, fortunes will reverse. When employees return to work, Zoom will feel the pinch. When the curfews are lifted, delivery apps will suffer. Most of our consumption patterns will return to normal, even if it's a new normal. This will be a new challenge for these pandemic success stories. So what's the takeaway here? A sustainable business model is based on flexibility. It may thrive on disruptions, but it should also survive once the disruption fizzles out. Country or company, far-sightedness is the key to beating this pandemic. It's been a bad week for Elon Musk. First, a driverless Tesla car crashed in Texas, killing 2 people. And now the Chinese are furious with his company. A video from the Shanghai Auto Show has gone viral. A protester besieged Tesla's booth to complain about the malfunctioning of brakes. And this has triggered a chain reaction. Several Chinese consumers are expressing their grievances with Tesla cars. Making matters worse is a statement from Tesla's China executive who claimed that this protest was staged. Here's the story.
This lady is not a saleswoman, she is a protester. The words emblazoned on her t-shirt read "brake failure." The words she is shouting mean the brakes don't work. This happened at the Shanghai Automobile Show, China's oldest biennial car exhibition, featuring the world's biggest car makers: Volkswagen, BMW, Jaguar, and the controversy-ridden brand Tesla. This year, the car maker's booth was besieged by this protester. Reportedly unhappy with the malfunctioning brakes in her Tesla, she was dissatisfied with the company's handling of her numerous complaints and decided to upstage the brand. The video has gone viral on the Chinese social media platform Weibo. It has triggered a chain reaction. Many Chinese consumers are sharing their grievances with the car company. Fueling the social media fury further is the response of Tesla's vice president in China. Speaking on the incident, Grace Tao hinted that the protest was staged. She said, "Our team had put forward a lot of solutions to resolve the dispute, but the customer does not accept inspections, insisting on high compensation. Her actions have been very professional, but there might be people behind her." The same sentiment was echoed in the company's official statement. It was enough to encourage Tesla critics at Chinese state media outlets. From Xinhua to the Global Times, every leading media house in China has blasted Tesla. The company has been forced to apologize. It has vowed to carry out strict examination of its cars, because this incident has occurred at a particularly tricky time. In February, Tesla was summoned by regulators to discuss the quality of its Shanghai-made vehicles. Back home, things aren't any better. Last month, 27 special investigations were launched into crashes of Tesla vehicles in the United States. Tesla realizes how high the stakes are. China accounts for 30% of the company's global shares. It must course-correct for the sake of business, but the car maker must also ask itself, is it bearing the brunt of the ongoing US-China dispute? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.